Folks, our first on-demand workshop, How to Become a Coffee Consultant, is now available for you to learn at your own pace for just €50, and it comes with a certificate upon completion. Go to mapperforward.coffee/workshops or click the link in the show notes for more details. Support this podcast by supporting our sponsors. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 3 of a 5-part series with the fabulous Judy Ganes. Judy, today we are talking about the global economy and coffee. We've been talking about an economic tsunami that's coming on this podcast for quite some time now. It seems to be, as soon as it starts to edge closer, it seems to put itself further out. Nobody knows if there's going to be a hard landing or a soft landing or any landing at all. We don't know what's coming. What is the relationship of what the tenseness or the tension that exists in the global economy right now and its relationship to coffee?
Well, the good news is that coffee consumption tends to not be as sensitive to the global economy as what the market fears. So we had a situation last year where, everyone was worried about the fallout from the war in Ukraine and heating oil prices going up and hyperinflation and our consumers going to pull back and drink less coffee. And I always tell people, if someone's coffee drinking is habitual and a 3-cup-a-day drinker is still going to have their 3 cups a day,
they will shift to that behavior, right?
Okay. They're not going to change the amount of coffee they're consuming, but what they might do is change their behavior in terms of where are they purchasing their coffee from. And maybe the appliances that they bought during the pandemic that were, collecting dust on a counter, they're going to say, wait a second, we worked hard and, got these new barista skills, and we're going to go back to doing that as opposed to shelling out larger bucks at a cafe. So that would hurt food service segment where coffee is obviously at a higher price, and if people are looking to skimp on their budgets, then they go back to having more coffee at home, which actually tends to increase consumption because there's more waste. So, it's back to the kitchen sink having, a few more cups. And
because people are brewing too much at home and they don't drink at all.
They'll serve appliances in pods, take some of that away. But the market's already reflected that transition and adjustment for that. But maybe they'll say to someone, oh, would you like a cup? And, or maybe they'll go back and keep making additional cups, and maybe they didn't quite get it right the first time, and I'm going to make another cup and try it again. Now, the interesting dynamic is, do they count that as part of their consumption?
Right.
Because most people don't count waste. So they say, there'll be a survey, how many cups of coffee did you drink on average this past week? And they'll say 4 or 3. But they're not talking, they forget about all these little extra cups that they've consumed, which maybe they poured 1 cup and then they got busy on a call and it got cold and they poured it out and made another cup. Or they went out to dinner and they had a cup of coffee that maybe they normally wouldn't have late in the evening. Or someone got them a cup of coffee. And people forget about all these extra cups of coffee that they're consuming when they're thinking about, what is my average consumption? Well, it's 3 cups. But when you add all these little forgotten things, it's probably higher. Or look at when we go to conferences, right? And you have the coffee breaks and you have your coffee in the hotel room. And then you go down to breakfast and you're sitting there talking to people and you have another cup. And then you have the 2 breaks and the one at lunch and then the one at dinner. And it all adds up. And maybe you didn't drink all of it, but it's still consumed.
So people's habitual behavior isn't going to change of drinking coffee, but the there will be a shift, and we're seeing that quite clearly. We saw it during the pandemic. We are seeing it as inflation has continued to take hold. It's obviously not transitory. And people's consuming habits are shifting towards other things. We have very tight labor markets. We also have full employment in most countries around the world, most developed countries around the world. So people still have disposable income to spend on coffee at the moment.
Well, they have income. How much is disposable versus debt and other factors, and they need to spend it on other things is sort of where it gets a little bit cloudy. But
so as interest rates go up and people are having to commit more money to their mortgages because of increased interest rates, or increased credit card rates, and the price of eggs in the US is wild at the moment. So as people are starting to experience these inflationary pressures, and it's different everywhere around the world. Europe is experiencing really high inflation right now compared to the US, which is still high, but nothing compared to what's going on in Europe. Where do you see that people will start to like, when is the shift going to become something that moves the market?
I don't think it will.
Really?
I don't see, my almost 4 decades of following this market.
Yeah.
The shift in demand is so small relative to changes in production. It's a minor rounding error. There's a dispute about the size of the Brazilian crop from 3 years ago by 2-3 million bags. No one knows exactly what it was.
Okay.
You're not talking about that much of a loss in demand. No one really can pinpoint specifically how much global consumption is to start with. It's kind of, you look at change in stocks, but all stocks aren't visible, and how is it accounted for?
And then there's the cash market.
There's a lot of guesswork involved. There's a lot of stocks that, sort of show up when prices are high.
Yep.
And so to me, it's the production side and expectations on supply that are always going to be the key driver for the market, more so than consumption. But that being said, the psychological component is important, because roasters start to fear that something's going to change. They're going to see some backup in supply. And I'll give you an example. Sort of the trade stopped buying as much coffee from origin from some of the higher priced producers. And so there was a sense of, business is awful. So this is, like November last year. Okay. I remember being in Costa Rica, and then I was in Colombia, and everyone was talking about how terrible demand was. And it wasn't that demand was really terrible. It was that people stopped buying that coffee because it was more expensive.
More price sensitive, yeah.
And therefore they were feeling it more so than
commercial
Robusta
purchases. Yeah.
Right. And so you have shifts in the trade flows, and people were also reducing inventory. And if you're reducing inventory, thinking that demand is going to slow, then then the trade isn't buying as much. And therefore it's the sense of, things are weak, but they really aren't necessarily. It's just some gaps in the supply chain.
So that's the economics on the consuming end. On the producing end, we saw as the war in Ukraine was escalating, we saw that inputs into coffee producing became a real challenge for producers to be able to secure the supply, first of all, excuse me, and then to be able to afford the inflation in the pricing. Is that economic pressure going to continue into 2023, do you believe?
Well, there was some adjustments. So chicken manure became really popular.
Right.
And that drove up the prices because fertilizer prices were too high. And I think a real positive that's coming out of it is there's a lot of regenerative agriculture, organics, and that is going to make a big difference. And so, you know, from the negatives come positives, and farmers figure out a way to
adapt,
become more efficient and adapt, and at the same time help the environment. And so to me, that's all great. And you know, I'm hearing more and more that farmers are looking to do this, and they're thinking about the soil, they're thinking about the future, and their water use, and what are they going to do. And that's so important. It's really, really important.
You set us up perfectly for the next episode, where we're going to talk about Robusta, because talking about, you know, from the negatives come the positives, Robusta is a really, really great example of the way that a discussion that needs to be had around the way the industry sees coniferous and the necessity it's going to play in our industry moving into the future. So let's go have a conversation about that. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in, friends. There are 2 ways you can support this podcast. Firstly, become a paid member of our YouTube channel. Secondly, you can join our Patreon for as little as $3 a month. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video before you leave, and check the show notes for more information. Now, this is what you should check out next.